Welcome to the Green Goddess podcast. I'm your host, Tara. This is a show where we explore sacred medicines and the evolution of consciousness. Our guest today is Rak Razam, an experiential journalist who is also a film producer, culture maker, and a bridge between the worlds of shamanism, consciousness, and popular culture. He wrote, produced, and co-directed the groundbreaking visionary documentary Aya Awakenings, and he leads ayahuasca retreats in Peru. He's also the host of the In a Perfect World podcast and a speaker on psychedelics. Welcome, Rak.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank you, Tara.
Yeah, I'm so happy you're here. We met last year at the Exploring Psychedelics conference, where you gave a really wonderful talk, and it was called The Ocean in the Drop. And I loved it. It was about how we can take those peak transcendent experiences that we get on psychedelics and bring that experience of expansiveness and oneness back into our daily lives, into our being.
You know, it's interesting because there's this whole meme that's evolved now. It's almost a brand, and they're calling it the psychedelic renaissance. And to a large degree, it involves um, almost the re-sacralization, but it's the re-medicalization of these potentially transformative substances called psychedelics back into the Western medical fold. And as part of that, it's been reported on in every major media periodical and television show. They're all talking about microdosing in the office or ayahuasca ceremonies and retreats in Peru all around the world. And, PTSD and it being cured or alleviated with psilocybin mushrooms or MDMA, as different organizations are bringing that into legal studies at the moment, phase 3 trials here in the US and around the world with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. And all of this leads me right back to where you started. It's like there's so much talk about this, but it must be doing something, right? There must be something to this. What is this? What is this psychedelic revolution? What is this shamanic revolution? What are these substances? Where are we at culturally? And why are these things getting so much attention? And I think it's definitely because they're very active. They can work in the right context and the right set and setting with trained providers or practitioners guiding these medicines. They can be just that. They can be medicines, not drugs. They can be things which help heal people of the disconnection, of the aloneness, of the confusion, of the separation, and also they can help um, open us up to more of ourselves and help heal the traumas of history and civilization, and also plumb the depths and help us raise our baseline consciousness to become more, to become better, to reach more of our full potential as human beings on our spiritual path.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. I think what you just said right there, our true potential, is something that really fascinates me, in particular about working with ayahuasca. Because beyond simply healing, then there's more. There's more than just feeling okay. There's the question of what is our best self, and how can we begin to live as our higher selves, ourselves at a higher vibrational frequency, and how can we bring that to the world?
Mm. Well, that's the great gift, isn't it? I'm a writer and a journalist, and as you said, a producer of films and a believer in the power of these medicines, whether they're indigenous or from a lab, in the right cultural context. But also, I like a good turn of phrase, and I'm thinking of a fridge magnet I saw once, and I'm going to mispronounce, but the famous writer, it's like, what do they say? It's like, there's things like this, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come, or it's Anais Nin, I know, has this quote: "Is that the time will come when it's more painful to remain tied in the bud than it is to blossom," or that we
Mhm.
don't fear the thing we really fear isn't the mistakes or isn't things we get wrong, but it's how powerful we really are. Like, and I think that that's one of the great lessons of the first wave of psychedelics from the 60s, was that, you know, it actually started in the 40s in the modern sense. If we look at the history of, let's say, LSD as one of the main catalysts historically, and before that there was still mescaline and nitrous oxide and you know, many other substances going back into indigenous cultures and plant medicines as well. But definitely in the 60s with LSD, we saw that first cultural watershed where these incredibly powerful substances got out of the lab and we weren't ready for them, you know? And we didn't have in the West elders. We didn't have elders who weren't part of the military industrial entertainment complex who were just selling us out to a capitalist, you know, mechanistic perspective of the world, which didn't appreciate the spiritual path. But around that time, we discovered, you know, the elders, and whether that was looking to over to India or looking over to other indigenous cultures and their structures and their models of consciousness and models of spirituality. And, you know, in doing so, that first generation, you know, there was a lot of stuff. The 60s was a revolution, you know, in many ways, on many levels, culturally and socially, politically, environmentally, and spiritually. And what's happened since then is the peak experience of that, like when you drop a stone into water and it just goes plop, and there's that ripple effect. If you think of that ripple effect as time, space, time, and the generations, what we've learned from the 60s onwards is still being absorbed, and the ripples are coming back and they're bouncing, and there's a new wave building. And that wave has now reached out to indigenous cultures. And there's now not just a medicalization and psychedelics made in the lab and man-made things. There's a greater appreciation of earth-made things, of Gaia herself, of the planet, of our connection to the web of life. And at the same time, even psychedelics and extended consciousness has really turned its lens inward and looked at us, looked at who we are as human beings, what's our role in the world, in life, what is life. And, you know, science has come ahead in leaps and bounds, and we can really analyze and see so much interconnectedness and so much spirit and so much aliveness in the biological world, in the quantum world, you know, in these different levels of being that's sort of all dovetailing together. And it feels like there's this greater, deeper appreciation. And as you said, things like ayahuasca, which is one of the preeminent planetary avatars and catalysts, has done a lot of great work in this last generation, you know, bridging that gap between the shamanic world and the Western culture. So there's this progressive iteration of cycles of something larger going on that I think all of culture is a part of.
Hmm, I love that. Yeah, I think for me, what I am most excited about with sacred medicines is the way that they act upon human consciousness, because the situation that we have in the world, the disharmony that we have ecologically, the disharmony that we have within human populations of inequality of all different types and strife and pain and suffering, so much of that, really all of that, is a direct manifestation of consciousness. And
Mm,
so because we are all connected, as these medicines are healing us, the collective subconscious, the collective unconscious is changing, and our relationship to the earth is changing, and our relationship to each other is changing. And so we will have, and we are beginning to have, a different manifestation. And I really am excited for what's happening here. I feel that these medicines are bringing a new potential for what it is to have life here and what it is to be human here.
you know, when I first went down to Peru in 2006, it was as a journalist, you know, doing a at the time a freelance article on ayahuasca and the mythical archetype of the shaman and what that role meant in the 21st century. Um, and you know, as part of that, I really learned a lot more about the indigenous Peruvian understanding of the world and how they see the world, both from a perspective of the jungle and, you know, being in an environment which was alive and dynamic and needed their full engagement, you know, like they had almost like the idea that, you know, Eskimos have 200 words for snow, you know, that they would see all these different shades of green. They would have names for literally thousands of plants. Like just to dissect that even word shaman, that's a Western conceit. It's something that was, brought into the vocabulary in the 1950s and 60s, mainly in the Mercy Eliad's book Shamanism. But it's from the Siberian, their shaman, their medicine person, and we've applied that to people across the world who work with healing on behalf of the integrity and the well-being of their community. So whether that's through plant medicines or earth medicines or trance or dance, or mediation, there's many different ways that medicine people would connect themselves back to the planet and back to spirit and be conscious of the spiritual well-being of their communities. And so what
Hmm.
they told me in Peru was that, there's curanderos, which is from the Spanish to heal or to cure. And within that, there's many different applications and modalities. There's vegetalistas who work with medicinal plants, including ayahuasca, but who know literally thousands of plants and their healing properties like a more Western doctor and how to apply those. The ayahuasquero, for instance, works specifically with ayahuasca, and ayahuasca's, a entheogenic medicine. It has a psychedelic effect. It's a purgative where people usually, vomit and purge out impurities in their being, and it's very much connected to the stomach biome and connected to the cleaning out the liver and cleaning out the sugars, the salts, all the things which our diets, especially in the West, really make us unclean and build up and produce sickness from. But in the indigenous understanding, they also believe we have a spiritual or an energetic body and an emotional body, and that illness can start in the physical from any trapped energies on those levels. So as part of that ceremony, they might be working with ayahuasca. They might also be calling in the spirits of the other plants, the healing plants, or the vibrational codes of those plants, the icaros, which they sing. They might also be working with a dieta to clean out the person. There's many different varieties of healer in that cosmology. And the number one thing they said to me is that Westerners are coming in search of ayahuasca and the healing it can provide. There may be certain people with physical illnesses like tumors or cancers or immune systems, which it's not just that the ayahuasca cures it, it's that the ayahuasca, they've done scientific tests, is lowering these region of the brain called the default mode network and helping lower the egoic intellectual busyness of the mind that is frantic and anxious and out of integrity with itself. It's Western. It's sick, and it's calming that down. But in doing so, it's also getting to other aspects of the mind, like the limbic system, the emotional body, and it's allowing the unconscious to come up into the physical mind and to sort itself out, to defrag and to repair and to heal. And sometimes that healing then may result in a physical purging. So it's working on the physical level and all these other levels as well. But they also said that Westerners are coming who may have these sicknesses, but in general, the bulk of people coming they were seeing from the West, and by now, a good generation into ayahuasca's intake into the Western world, or Westerners going back to the old world, it has to be in the millions of people that have done ayahuasca. Like it really has to. It's been over 25 years that ayahuasca's been building in the West. So many people have done it. But they said in general, the biggest thing that they were seeing is that people were coming, Westerners were coming with this spiritual disconnection, this spiritual sickness, that they did not see themselves as part of the world. They saw themselves as separate. They saw themselves as disconnected. They felt like something was missing. They felt not whole. And that's the root origin in language of like whole, holy, holistic. And, the Latin for religion is to reconnect, it's to reweave. And then you ask, well, to what? I mean, the planet, the green goddess, Mother Gaia, as your show's named after, this idea that we're in a living organism, we're in nature, Mother Nature, and an ecosystem which has created and birthed us. And for all the medicalization, all the healing, all the new age language around all this, This, I think, is the greatest gift and the greatest remembrance is that we have one day at a time this miracle called life, and we forget the preciousness and the holiness of being whole, of coming home, of being connected to something greater, which is the miracle of life, which is intelligent and loving and has never given up on us despite what we do to this planet. And that this process of being in this planet and this planet being embedded in a larger galactic ecosystem and this process of life, all of it is consciously sculpting and herding us towards some culmination of the process of consciousness. And that is what these plant medicines and earth medicines and the whole shebang, I believe, is really all about.
Mm, yes, and I love that you mentioned that the planet hasn't given up on us and that these medicines haven't given up on us, because I'm really struck in working with them how infinitely compassionate and patient they are with human beings. How
Mm,
the consciousness of these medicines is so far beyond our own. They understand us inside and out, and they understand far more than I think any human could conceive of. And so, as I've been working with the sacred medicines, I'm increasingly, especially lately with hape, the tobacco snuff medicine, I'm continuing to get this message that we're children, that they see us as we're really like children, and they are really our teachers. They're our elders, and from an evolutionary perspective, they are indeed our elders.
mm,
There were plants before there were people, right? And from a vibrational perspective, they're absorbing pure sunlight and rain, and they're rooted into the earth. And
mm.
so there's finer, higher, subtler frequencies that they can channel and connect to. And so I'm finding that I see these medicines as beings, as essentially in a way like bodhisattvas. They're giving their bodies, their lives, everything to us to help us, to relieve us from physical, emotional, and as you said, spiritual suffering.
I love that. Let's coin the phrase vegetal bodhisattvas. That's great. But
Vegetal.
this is the
Yeah.
thing in the mechanistic Western point of view. A few hundred years ago, the Industrial Revolution sort of fallout, we separated from the planet, and in doing so, we gave up believing in divas and intelligences and embedded energies, and consciousness in the planet. That we're the dominant species, and that we're the really only ones with an intelligence that matters. And in that ego blinding, we were just children, and I think that's both humbling and enlightening to come back to realizing that we're one strand in the planetary biome, in this idea. And I'm really riffing a lot as a writer here and as you know, um, a storyteller, but looking at so much of science and looking at this developing science of the biome, we know that our stomach area has, I think, something like 7 trillion microorganisms, which we can't live without. We're actually, they say now, a colony organism. Each human being, we think we're an individual because our egoic consciousness keeps us separate. But there's other cultures which are more tribally orientated. There's other creatures which are more hive mind orientated, like the insects and other animals. But even within our human organism, we're actually made up, and something like a large percentage of our DNA is not the human DNA. It's these microorganisms which break down our food and assist in all the metabolic functions and things like that. There's even been a lot of work looking at cravings from these microorganisms. There's
Right.
this horrifying thing called toxoplasmosis, which is a virus of some sorts, like a fungus or something, which infects mice, and it makes mice give themselves up to cats to be eaten, so then they can transmit the virus to the cats. And there's all these examples in nature of viral life forms. And humans and even multicellular life forms are really recent in larger biological history if you start to take the big perspective of life on Earth. But even within the human
Right.
organism, we need these other invisible creatures, the stomach biome, and there's a lot of recent scientific studies coming out looking at the integrity or the health of the biome, the stomach biome in depression, in different, illnesses in people. They've even really
Yes.
recently, very, very recently discovered that the vagus nerve connects the stomach biome all the way up to the brain, and that the brain does not have a fully airtight compartmentalization from bacteria. They used to think that it was totally sealed off, but now they've identified that it has its own brain biome, and that biome is connected to the stomach biome. And that a lot of the conditions we're seeing in Western culture, which are part and parcel of the repercussions of the stress of Western culture, a lot of it is also the denuded food we're taking in, and the breakdown of the food systems, and the lack of organic food, and the pesticides, and all those things which are killing off our stomach biome and those microorganisms, and they're making our consciousness equally sick. And that's a
Right. I
reflection of,
agree more.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's in the micro level. If you then extend that out, that analogy of the biome to the planet, you can start to see the contours of this concept that the Gaia herself, is regulating and growing herself as a fully, um, macro object. Like if Gaia is one person in the galactic family, let's say, to mix metaphors, within her, it's like humans are just one strand in the planetary biome, just like we have all these millions of strands. So those 7 billion humans have started to go off. We've started to crave the sugar. We started to eat into the mother and take from her way too much. And she's starting to get sick, you know? And so it's like, but look at the other strands around us, the plants, the animals, all of those, they're also in the biome, and they serve a role. And just read this really interesting thing, as you may and your listeners may have known. We're going through what they call the sixth great species extinction at this time. The insects are in dramatic collapse of their colonies. The bee colonies are collapsing. The insects in general are collapsing. And I read this interesting thing about the bees. It's not just there's all these different strands of bees and varieties of bees, like honeybees and others. It's not just that they take pollen from flowers and create their own honey and keep the food cycle going on that level, and keep the pollination, and like the human strand is one, the insect strand is another, the vegetal strand is another in the Gaian biome, but they're all working in synergy, or they should when they're working well. So when the bees are in decline, it means the flowers won't pollinate. And not only that, I discovered this thing about other bees. It's not just that they carry the pollen. There's a certain type of bee that flutters its wings at a certain vibration. Get this, right? And the vibration is what causes the plant to pollinate in the first place. What an
Mm.
intricate dance of interspecies symbiosis. And then once you realize all the other creatures are doing this, and then it's like, well, wait a sec, what are we doing? Because what have we been doing by killing off all the other species? But how can we rejoin that dance of interspecies cooperation? And how can we do it with an awareness of Gaia as a whole, of improving the Gaian biome? And that's what I really believe on a top level is happening with the medicines like ayahuasca, San Pedro, psilocybin, the Bufal various toad, the different things. We're still seeing them through the lens of a capitalist structure and a consumerist structure, which is like, oh, in the 60s, we took acid, or we take MDMA, or here we are taking something, but we're not seeing the relationships. And especially with the shamanic medicines, these very powerful substances, they're secreted by the planet. We're not making them in a lab. We didn't make these up. We have, hundreds of thousands of years of history potentially with these and things like the cannabinoids, because we have cannabinoid receptors in the brain designed to receive these substances. So I think we really need to stop thinking that these are just peak experiences and start to look at the fact that they're actually Gaian mediated immune response, um, relationships, that are really bigger than even human culture is yet really starting to turn the corner of perceiving. Because once you do, it changes that locus almost in a Galileo moment of what revolves where. It's like we're not just not the dominant species, we're embedded in a living organism, and it's all around us, and we've forgotten how to see it.
Mm. I
Juicy,
love
huh?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we tend to think about life on Earth as so human centric, right? And even like you're saying, even the work with the sacred medicines and the psychedelics, it's mostly discussed in terms of its impact on humanity. And yet, as you've beautifully expressed, it goes much bigger than that.
Yeah, I think it's a process underway. And you know what I like to say, and this is what I wrote, you mentioned at the start, I've made a documentary called Aya Awakenings, and there's a book of the same name, AYA, colon Awakenings. Um, and in that I remember saying it's like there's the planetary response, there's a global shamanic resurgence, but there's something bigger going on. It's like nature is inviting us back to the garden, and that has all those metaphoric implications of the garden and the utopia and the time before his story, the time before we fell into this consciousness, which was necessary perhaps, but has distanced us from the remembrance of what we're really in. And I think that these medicines, everyone gets pretty enamored by, let's say, the visions with ayahuasca and also but it's really the healing. I mean, the healing, whether it's the psilocybin mushrooms and the connection or San Pedro or ayahuasca or whatever, but it's cleaning us out. It's helping remove the stresses, the tensions, the PTSD, the traumas of civilization. And when we are calm again, when we are open in our hearts again, then we can connect to the signal always being broadcast from Mother Nature and source behind nature. And
Right.
we can come home again. And it's like, it's almost, I almost feel that, at its deepest truth, we are the medicine. And the other medicines, as you've beautifully said, are like allies and are like guardians, and they're the caretakers, and they're the elders and the teachers. And they've just been waiting for us to
Yes.
go through this phase to be ready again to go, are you ready to remember? Because it's time that you grow up. And to do that, you're going to have to be psychologically ready. So we've had a whole phase, as I mentioned earlier, from the 60s on, where we've integrated the wave and the impact of that revelation of whatever we went through culturally back then and since then. And there's been successive waves from the 60s on. There was, you know, waves in the 80s again. Ecstasy came in and the heart opened as well as the head in the 60s, and then plant medicines in the noughts, and then the spirit has opened up, and there's there's like a breadcrumb trail deeper and deeper into the mystery. And it's all pointing to the fact that we're not alone and that there are other intelligences in nature and of nature herself. And that the journey we're on at the moment is one of healing. And once we've healed enough, then the capacity of the human to connect to source consciousness and to nature will reveal that we are the medicine, just like they are the medicine.
Mm. I love that. So I want to shift gears a little bit. Since you worked so deeply with ayahuasca and you're leading retreats in Peru with ayahuasca, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your personal experiences with that medicine. What makes you particularly passionate about it?
Well, yeah, I've been working with ayahuasca for 12 to 13 years now, and I don't work with it ongoingly. I do my annual retreats, which are coming up this June 22nd to July 1st in Peru, and I work with a maestro shaman, Percy Garcia Lozano, who I've been working with for those same amount of years. And for me, it's a bit of a pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage to go home, to go back to that space and to devote those 10 days of the retreat away from the Western world, away from screens, away from that busy egoic mind of mine, and to drop back in and to do my personal healing and to reconnect with Madre Ayahuasca and to lead groups. I feel a very close affinity with all the people I go on retreat with and lead there and bring to Percy and the little, it's a bit like a school. It's a bit like a learning and a teaching, but I'm there learning and as well as teaching. And so, my relationship with ayahuasca is often cleansing. It's that physical healing. It's coming back to that space to check in with myself, to check in with what I need to let go of, to do that emotional cleanse and that energetic cleanse as well. And you know what I'm really excited about? I miss ayahuasca. And it's nice, like a lot of my work in other retreats in Mexico have been with the Bufo Various Toad, which is a different
Right.
medicine.
Hmm.
And I'm also the convener of the World Bufo Various Congress in Mexico City each July, the big conference we have there. So a lot of my community work talks about that medicine more, but I love ayahuasca. And it's hard work. It's a lot of purging quite often, and it's long ceremonies, which is why you need a sacred container. And I don't do ayahuasca in the West traditionally. I just do it in Peru. I do it the indigenous way in the darkness with the icaros, with the songs, which are vibrational codes sung by the shaman, by the curandero. Um, in the set and setting, which I feel most at home with, and it's a deeply healing experience. And I heal each time. I mean, there's always deeper levels to uncover and things to work through. And also, I miss the intelligences of the doctores and the relationship with the plant spirits, with the teachers, which can be very tangible. It's not just Madre Ayahuasca, which they believe in the Peruvian tradition is a spirit, an ally, an energy that has its own relationship with you when you drink the medicine. It's who she is working with, all the other plant intelligences and all the ancestors and those who have gone before, and that feeling of connection and that feeling of wisdom of the keepers of the planetary intelligence. That's what I'm really looking forward to, and that's what I miss when I don't partake of ayahuasca.
Yes, yes. In the ceremonies that I've had with ayahuasca, I've had a number of occasions where the ancestors were present, and it was amazing. My sense of it is that ayahuasca as a medicine opens up the quantum field, opens up a space-time portal, so to speak, where anything is possible and we can connect with any beings. And in that portal, in that sacred container, yes, the ancestors come through. And it's so fascinating because my experiences with that is that they're completely aware of what's going on here in the present, what we consider the present moment. It's all the present moment. But there's a real direct interaction as if interacting with another human being in daily life almost.
Mm, mm,
Except it's the visionary space, and the ancestors are coming through to teach us. They have tools for how we can work with our spiritual capacity as creators in partnership with the sacred medicines to heal ourselves and the planet. And they come in with messages much of the time, and with energetic transmissions, codes, as you've said, which is which is right on in my experience, is right on, absolutely. They send vibrational codes through these medicines to us in the present. And it fascinates me as well that the capacity of ayahuasca to change us on a DNA level and to impart gifts. I've experienced personally that um, I can sing now. I can sing well with that medicine,
mm.
and that's a new thing. I spent my whole life feeling tone deaf and very embarrassed about it.
Well, that's the
Um,
beauty, because yeah, sometimes
yeah,
there's the healing, there's the illumination and the connection, and then sometimes then there's the service, and then sometimes I mean it's quite common that ayahuasca can impart songs to you, the icaros, the vibrational codes, and it means you have that relationship with that vibration and that energy and the plant or the spirit behind it. And then that's the beauty. You can continue to share that vibration and that song and that connection, by weaving it into your life, by remembering that song, by singing, by transmitting. We all become these. Once the healing happens, then the full potential can be revealed, and then that potential can continue to transmit when you go back into your world and your community and your life, knowing your place in it, in the weave, in the great tapestry, and how we all are that picture, how we're all making it up together, and how we can contribute. And that's just so freaking beautiful, to be part of something larger than ourselves.
yes, absolutely. So, I'd like to talk with you for a moment about the toad, since you work so deeply with the toad medicine. So, I'm not so experienced with that one. I'd love to hear more about the toad from you. And I want to say about ayahuasca again that, as you mentioned, our place in the web. Yeah, for me, oftentimes sitting with that medicine, I've done most of my healing work in other ways. So for me, when I sit with that medicine, it is more about a cosmic experience of what is my purpose and what messages do I need to apply? How can I be a better human being? And how can I serve? And activations and things like that. So for me, that's how I understand that medicine. What I understand about the toad is that it's a much quicker experience. Ayahuasca ceremonies, are like 6 hours or so, sometimes longer, sometimes yeah, somewhere around that. And then with the toad, it's a 20 or 30-minute experience, right?
It can be. I mean, here's the number one thing. I've had to expand my vocabulary to go from like plant medicines to earth medicines because
Yes,
the toad is a living creature,
right.
and it's an amphibian. So we're talking about the Bufo ovarius toad, which is native to the north of Mexico in the Sonoran Desert, going over into Arizona in the US. It's not officially an endangered species, and this is, some of the issues around the supply and demand of these substances. Even with ayahuasca, there's been a increased demand and load on the medicine. But the toad is a living creature that lives 9 months of the year under the ground in Mother Gaia, deep in the earth. And out of about 484 toad species in the world, it's the only one that has the crown and the jewel of entheogens, 5-MeO-DMT or 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine in its in these parotoid glands on the back of its neck, on the legs and the feet. They're part of its immune defense system, and it comes up every 3 months in monsoon season when it rains. And the medicine doesn't have necessarily a proven, unbroken Mesoamerican lineage. So things like ayahuasca are all over South America. Things even like psilocybin mushrooms have, Mexican lineage in Oaxaca, in the traditions of Mexico, who also have connections with, the San Pedro cactus. A lot of the different plant medicines have tribes that have unbroken lineages and connections and ways to use the medicine. So the toad may have had an archaic tradition. There's iconography in Mexico with the toad right next to Quetzalcoatl, one of the main gods, right next to the jaguar, the shamanic sort of archetypes. But it's really only in the last decade or less that it has been jump started back into awareness in some of the Sonoran Desert tribes. And it has been known of, or at least 5-MeO-DMT in the Bufo toad from the 50s in scientific tests. And it's just been really in the underground of the underground in Arizona and Mexico, and it's sort of trickled out. But here's my thing. I mean, the experience, it can be very brief. It can be between 5 and 15 minutes. It is smoked. There's other trace elements in the toad medicine of bufotenine and about 17 other alkaloids. When it is inhaled in a smoke, it goes into the lungs and it bypasses the gut, and it goes straight through the blood-brain barrier because the brain accepts it. It knows what it is. It's just the 5-MeO that is vaporized, and it's not toad 5-MeO. It's 5-MeO, which is endogenous to human consciousness. The tryptamines, and N-dimethyltryptamine, as well as 5-MeO, pinealine, melatonin, all these tryptamines are produced in the lungs and the cerebrospinal fluid. They're part of our repertoire neurochemically of how consciousness, operates itself. Um, if a human being is in total darkness for 10 or more days, according to some indigenous traditions of darkness retreats. And there's even modern retreats that Mantak Chia, the tantric master, holds in Thailand that does this as well.
Mm.
The You there?
Yeah, wow, I've
The
never heard of a
yeah,
darkness retreat.
the melatonin or the melatonin in the skin pigment will start to leave the body by about day 3, 4, 5, 6. The natural aggregation of tryptamines potentiates in darkness, in total darkness, and people can have a spontaneous 5-MeO experience. This is the same, potentially, most likely, 99% I'm sure, um, reason that on a neurological, biological level, we have had these peak mystical experiences throughout history. Back in 1900, William Morris Buck wrote this book, Cosmic Consciousness, which looked at the historical record of personages like Buddha and Jesus Christ and Mohammed and a lot of the saints and a lot of the people who made it into the history books, which has its own blinkers there as well. But the similarities in their experience, the idea that even people who have had near-death experiences point to a sense of the numinous, of the divine, of the white light or this tunnel meeting their beloved ancestors or the ones who have gone before. These spiritual experiences of what we could call source consciousness, which underpin the physical vibrational reality, are what 5-MeO seems to engender in us. So when the toad medicine is inhaled, the brain lets it in, and essentially the toad isn't doing it. The 5-MeO, is unlocking the endogenous human full potential. And the closest maps of this are the Vedic traditions of India, where they have intricate maps of different stages of consciousness leading up to what they call Nirvikalpa Samadhi, or the grand reunification with source consciousness within. So all these layers of being, which are intricately mapped in you can read them in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. You can see glimpses of them in the Upanishads or the Rig Veda. These maps have left us, and other cultures have equally good maps, but these are the ones I'm really interested in of late, are identical to the 5-MeO experience. And it's important to remember that you don't need to partake of toad to do this, because it's endogenous. It's in us. People have these peak experiences at birth, at death, at near-death experiences. Some tribal cultures have 5-MeO in plant forms, in versions of ayahuasca brews, in the yahe brew of Ecuador. They have a version there. There's Phalaris grass, which also has 5-MeO, but it's part of the human condition. So toad medicine and the awareness of 5-MeO and of the full potential, it's a very, very potentially intense experience. It's a very short-lasting experience. It's something which is not for everyone. There have been deaths associated with this experience, usually from practitioners that have not provided safe duty of care or medical screening for things like heart conditions, high blood pressure, psychological disturbances. It's a very intense experience, and it's something to be approached with great care and reverence, like all medicines, to make sure that it is a right fit for everyone. But it also feels to me that the toad medicine, in a holographic sense, is arriving in the global shamanic community on the sort of coattails of a generation of ayahuasca, and of this increased awareness of the importance of ceremony and of the container and of preparation and integration. And that idea of ceremony and those things which go with it, the approach to these medicines, has also now expanded to psilocybin circles and San Pedro circles and other medicines, Cambo circles.
Mm-hmm.
So we're sort of culturally ready for the 5-MeO experience, which is so important. And, it's not necessary. 5-MeO is within, and this is the big differentiator for me, is that all the plant medicines have been so good at helping heal and cleanse us personally and collectively, that I feel that in some way it's like they've been preparing us for the revelation of the 5-MeO experience, because it is endogenous and you don't necessarily need an external catalyst for it. You can get there through breath work. You can get there through tantra. You can get there through meditation. These are the pathways it travels down and it reveals. And if you have any of those modalities, they're very good preparations for this experience, just as they are for other plant medicines. Because I think what we've been seeing is the shamanic resurgence and these other plant medicines and now earth medicines, they've all actually just been different lenses to know the potential of our own operating system. That science has done these tests with legal tests with LSD, with psilocybin mushrooms, with ayahuasca, and with 5-MeO. and they're all switching off these regional clusters of the brain called the default mode network. And it's not the substance you take, the external catalyst, that is having the psychic effect. It's switching off the filters of the brain, stopping you from connecting to the full spectrum of consciousness, which is always out there. So this is
Mm-hmm.
part of our grooming and our birthright to not be the children anymore in the Gaian galactic family, but to start to move into the adolescence of awareness of adulthood, what we're in, what we really are, how we plug into the planetary mainframe, how we connect to the galactic ecosystem. I mean, these are sort of new agey terms, but the potential to know ourselves is what these medicines are revealing. And 5-MeO is a very potent star at the top of the Christmas tree, or light on the tree of life, of the stepping stones of these medicine activations.
Could you share a little bit about maybe a personal experience with Toad so that we can get a sense of what it's like? I know every experience is going to be different for everybody, even for the same person every time. But could you share a little bit
When
about what
when
it's
I
like?
have worked with this medicine legally in Mexico, I have had some very profound experiences. And you know, there's a little bit of hesitation. It's like it's like describing making love, right? It's like, oh my God, I had this incredible experience. Well, that's nice, but it's your experience, right? But it's like it's all on the inside. So, I've helped sponsor some scientific studies looking at the brainwave activity and the hypercoherence in the brain, and increased gamma, which is sort of this cohesive unity state. But that doesn't tell you how you feel. So what I've felt is this layers and layers and layers of falling away of my mind, of who and what I think I am, to reveal that my thoughts are like they're like an app running on the operating system, but I am the operating system. And there's an awareness of consciousness of pure being, which is probably closer to a meditation state of not busyness of thoughts, but just this presence of being, which for me, and especially with the toad, I find more heart activating. And there's an awareness of dropping into um, a state of unity consciousness, an awareness of that unity consciousness, that I am, it's like the center is everywhere, and there's this holographic presence, this deep, non-intellectual, non-egoic, like it might sound egoic, but it's not, it's hard to describe. But essentially, the ego mind falls away, and there is this intuitive understanding, this aha moment, this eureka realization which comes from the heart, that all is one, that all is love, and that these words do not convey the majesty, the purity, the the intensity of what love really is. And if you've ever been in love, you will know, in that sweetness, in that purity, in that unity, that when you are reciprocating love or feeling love, there's that warmth, that connection, that being. So that's like a drop. And the drop of love in the 5-MeO experience lets go and remembers it is the ocean. And it's an ocean of pure, radiant, um, unconditional love that is so intense. It's like being in the heart of a star. If you could imagine the feeling of love being the heart of the sun, that is the potential of connecting to the oceanic network of love, which is light, which is consciousness, which is source, and all of that being filtered through the nodal point of your drop. It's too much, and yet it's all there is.
Mm.
That's the potential, and there's many steps along the way where it can be a very healing modality of helping shed vibrationally and let go of traumas, stress, PTSD, things lodged in our vibrational bodies, our emotional bodies, even our physical bodies, to peel away that onion skin, to reveal that source consciousness within. In the Upanishads, they have this beautiful translation where they say that everyone has the seed of God within them. And it feels to me like the external catalyst of Toad is a bit akin metaphorically to when a forest fire burns through and it takes away all the old growth, and it's only in that intense heat that certain seeds germinate. And I think that line from the Upanishads about the seed of God within, that's what this external catalyst can do, is that it in the intensity, it germinates that seed of God. And it's from then on, it's actually endogenous, and it's a connection and a vibration which is alive and needs to be nurtured in the temple of the body and in the relationship with life itself. I mean, it's sounding a bit cosmic, I know, but it's something which is a beginning, and it's not just about Toad. It's really, that's what I think is at the heart of all these experiences, and not even from plants or Toad, but I mean, behind the veil, behind everything, is an alive, intelligent, and loving creator, which is the creation and is seeding itself and learning and growing in the experience of being alive. And we're all part of that journey. And however you come, if you come to that realization, then it's perfect. And everyone's path to get to that is perfect. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. What an exquisite gift. Thank you so much. Rak Razam. Wow. It's been really a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing.
It's been a joy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to have been here for you in this auspicious moment of your podcasting career.
Yes, episode 1. Thank you.
It
So I'm
begins.
curious. Yes, I'm curious if a listener was inspired, as I'm sure we all are, and they want to experience the toad medicine. How do they go about that? Where do they find information? Are you doing retreats in Mexico? What's your website?
I think the best thing is, let me feel. There's some Facebook groups out there. I mean, when it gets to this part of the conversation and I put out my URLs, my ayahuasca one, and I have only a few spots left coming up in June for the Aya retreat in Peru. That's aya-awakenings with an s.com/retreats, or ayaawakenings.com. You can have a look at the film, have a look at the book, you can have a look at the retreats and testimonies of people that have been before. There's that. I may be doing some toad work in Mexico around the time of the World Buffet of Areas Congress in July. There's quite a few practitioners who go, and WEBAC, as the acronym is, doesn't officially endorse any medicine work there, but it is legal to do the toad work in Mexico. So that URL is wbac.info, and it's not launched for 2019 yet, but the dates are July 26th to 28th, and that would be the greatest opportunity for people to see a diversity of practitioners there and to learn more about toad culture and community and science and um, integration and all the different things. And in general, if people want to connect with me, they can find more information about these type of talks and my documentaries and my books and my podcast through my website, Rakrazam, rakrazam.com.
Excellent. Thank you. And to our listeners that would like to connect with me, Tara Rose, you can find me on Instagram at Green Goddess Rising. You can, of course, subscribe to this podcast, the Green Goddess Podcast. And you can find me on YouTube at YouTube/Tara Rose Sacred Medicine, where, similar to the show, we're exploring sacred medicines in a good way for the evolution of consciousness. Thanks so much for joining us today, and may the plants be with you.
And also with you.